that, we are ready for our next panel. This is something I'm super excited about. We're going to be just talking about smart contract security. And for this panel, we have Sam, Susie, Sun, Nikesh, Rajeev, and Maurelian on stage. And Maurelian will be facilitating this discussion. So I'll let him ask all the panelists to introduce themselves instead of me doing the whole thing and making it more fun. So I'll hand this off to him and welcome everybody on stage.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, thanks, Kartik. I'm Maurelian, and let's do some intros. So Nikesh, why don't you start us off, and then Sam and Rajeev.
Perfect. Yeah. Thanks. It's great to be here. Yeah. So my background is in I actually did physics and computer science at some point before the times before I was joining the blockchain space. I was pottering around in a bit of cryptography, a little bit of reverse engineering, just general IT security type things. But for the last 2.5 years, I've been working at Open Zeppelin as a security researcher. So basically, we do audits and research and trying to improve the security of the space, protect the open economy, as you say. I guess that's my broad outline.
Thank you, Sam.
Cool. Hey guys, I'm Sam. I'm a research partner at Paradigm, and I do security. So finding bugs, mostly just finding bugs. That's about it. That's basically all I do. Yeah.
Rajeev.
Hey everyone, I'm Rajeev. I'm the founder of Securium, which is a recent initiative to further improve the state of security of Ethereum applications. And Securium is currently running a bootcamp on smart contract security auditing that's funded by an Ethereum Foundation grant and sponsor partnerships from Consensus Diligence, Sigma Prime, and TrailerBits. So here I am. Thanks.
Great. Okay, so and by way of introduction, I was one of the original members of Consensus Diligence, and am now working at Optimism, focusing on protocol development and security issues. And so I'm really excited to be doing this panel. I think that so given that ETH Global that this conference is really focused on tooling, which I think is a really exciting topic, and this group is really security focused, I think it'd be great to we'll move this conversation along kind of like balanced on the knife's edge between tooling and security, of which there's a good amount of overlap. So having done that, I think like a good place to start would be just we can each provide a little bit of context about the way we approach tooling, where it fits in our day-to-day roles, what we're looking for when we're choosing what tools to include in our tool boxes, if you will, and if anything, maybe tools that you might have built in the past as well. Nikesh.
Fair enough. Yeah, so actually, as mentioned just before we started this, that my day-to-day work is it's pretty sparse with tools. So a lot of what I'm doing is just reading code and then trying to understand it deeply. I think we have a bit of a bias that way, that we think a lot of the value we provide is just a security engineer taking the time to deeply understand code and then trying to match the knowledge to the particular task at hand. But I was saying I do think a lot of the tools that I find are useful are just things that avoid distractions. So like I have really good note-taking tools, for instance, to help me keep track of what I'm doing as I'm reviewing. We can talk a bit some of those if you're interested, or the fact that I have like in the past, if I needed to understand like a line of Solidity, I would like launch Remix and then try and write it in there, which was a huge waste of time. But now I've got like this Solidity REPL, which just connects to like a local Ganesh CLI. In itself, like the whole point of that tool is just so that I can stop thinking about it. So I have a thought in my head, like what does this line of Solidity do? I quickly go and do that, and then get back to what I was attempting to do before, which was just understanding the system. But I think a lot of it really depends on what you're attempting to do. Maybe just being a security auditor, there's a particular style in that we follow, which is just trying to understand contracts deeply. But of course, there are different approaches to security all over the space, and I'm imagining there'll be several tools that will be useful in other places. I might leave it there for now. Rajeev, I'll pass it over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I can jump in here.
Yeah.
I think I mostly agree. Like when I'm doing audits for reviews, I tend to actually stay away from a lot of the automated scanners. I find that I'm gonna end up going through and reviewing the contracts anyways. And so for me at least, there isn't really much benefit that those scanners bring. However, that being said, I do find value in tools elsewhere. Like for example, when I'm reviewing some contract on mainnet, sometimes I need to figure out what's in a particular storage slot or what happens if some function is called. In the past, I would pull up DevTools and web3.eth. Get storage at. And it worked. It was very ugly, but it worked. Nowadays, I actually just use Seth for that from the DevTools package. So here we go. We're 3 minutes in, and already someone has showed DevTools. Let's see where else this goes.
Yeah, it's funny. Like I kind of got off Twitter for a lot of the summer, and then I came back and everyone's like talking about DevTools, which has been around forever. Where did that come from? What is it like? What flipped there that everybody wants to talk about DevTools all of a sudden?
I actually think it might just be trends. Like you learn about a bunch of these things because they're happening on Twitter, and then everybody else learns about them because they're happening on Twitter. And I think a lot of the security community is relatively small, and a lot of the value is just like knowing what other people in the community are doing. You hear that, like I get to read a blog that Samsung's written, and then I learn something new because of that fact. And I think it's just like access to the community. You'll end up doing whatever else they're doing. That's my instinct, but I don't know. I can't speak for why other people do what they do.
I mean, it's really cool. Like Martin and the team at DevTools have been working so hard for so long. It's nice to see them getting some traction like that. But please go ahead, Rajeev.
No, I mean, I might be the odd man out. I haven't used DevTools, so yeah, please excuse me for that. I'm gonna actually try to do that over the weekend. But yeah, I mean, from a tooling perspective, I think the points made are valid. The way I see it, I do see tooling in the space of Ethereum security as maybe focused on developers and maybe a separate set of tools that are focused on auditors. And today, I think there is a good overlap. So a lot of the auditors, like Sam was saying, you just are in the space, you're looking at contracts, and predominantly there's a lot of manual analysis. So the ROI that you would get from any of the automated tools is maybe not that much on a day-to-day basis. Maybe there are some special use cases for that. But for developers, I think there is a lot of value, right? Be it any of the static analysis tools like Slither or the Mythex or any of those. There's a lot of value to that. So I do see that sort of dichotomy. Maybe that gets blurred sometimes. But as for me, when I review contracts, I do fall back on manual analysis. So the tool that I use there is usually the Solidity Visual Developer plugin, which really helps me navigate the code. Very cool, that stuff.
For VS Code
past,
IDE.
VS
Code.
Just
to be clear, yeah. By my old friends at Diligence.
Yep, Tintin Web. Yep. So that's fantastic. And I do tend to use Slither now and then to just get me some good starting points, to just get some sanity checks going. And in the past, I've actually contributed several detectors to the development of Slither. So that's my general perception on tooling aspects. Yeah.
So the way that like the pattern I'm sensing here, I think is as auditors, it's very different from developers. Like as a developer, you just you live in one code base and you are there all the time. And you started, you joined this company or project, and they gave you a couple weeks to ramp up. The amount of time that is kind of like the training period for someone at a new company is kind of like how long you have for an audit, I think. So what security researchers and auditors are doing is just like really trying to understand the code as quickly as possible. And so I think that there's seems like the pattern is that you're sort of like a bit more, less of like a just point and shoot scanner approach and more of a marriage of, say, human and automation to get deeper understanding. And I think that's where you see the visualization tools, the graphing, those kinds of things becoming very, very popular for auditors. But so, I mean, you guys also see a lot of different code bases, I imagine. Do you see patterns of tools? And so you have opinions about teams and code bases and which ones are good and which ones you love less. And we don't have to talk about names, but do you see patterns of tools that the teams you think, you know, are on the right track are using in their development process?
So I guess my advice is whenever I see teams using, so like the team that I have in mind at the moment, they do all of their pull requests out in the open, and then they answer their questions, and they have security questions. Quite often I'll be reviewing code, and then I'll go look at the pull requests that they made or some of the commits, and I get to see all their comments and their thought process behind it. All of that stuff is really useful. I don't know, like it seems to be correlated with a lot of the continuous integration tools that they use. Like, so because I'm not a developer, I can't say exactly how related these things are, but I think there's probably some level of professionalism when you reach the point where you take just development seriously, and then you make sure that there are two people reviewing every like all your. There's always someone who reviews all your code, and then you're going through the process correctly. That does seem to be at least correlated in my mind with people who take security seriously as well. And just maybe riffing a little bit on what Rajeev was saying, I think a lot of clients will actually use some of these tools before they reach an audit, and it's like a good way to find your own like bugs first in your own code before you actually take the time and effort to go and get it audited. So I guess that's my initial instinct. I'm not recommending a particular tool other than just noting the level of professionalism does seem to correlate somewhat with the level of security analysis, maybe.
So say you might say, so GitHub or Git and the code collaboration tools that in general that just enable people to ask each other hard questions about what they're trying to merge.
Right. So I guess like everybody is using GitHub, but then some of them are just like pushing to master directly, and some people are making pull requests with reviews, and that's the sort of way that I.
That's like reviewing pull requests is a like a high bar or like an indicator or something.
I mean, maybe I think it depends on the detail. I'm thinking I'm speaking like.
Sorry, my point is that it's crazy that anybody's not doing that. I think is just what I'm getting at, but okay.
Yeah, I think my instinct is really more about like how much effort they put into reviewing pull requests. There's obviously different degrees of how seriously you take that sort of thing.
Certainly, yeah. Okay. So I think like maybe even if it's not the focus for anyone here, I'm curious what, if any, impressions you have about the potential there is among the more advanced tooling. So static analysis, I think like running Slither is a really good, just like, you know, it points out a lot of stuff, a lot of code smells. That's a static analysis tool. Then I think, you know, fuzzing, there's a variety of good fuzzers out there that are maybe the next step to look at, or else symbolic execution tools. Do you have a sense? Do you have a feeling about like where we are at with those? Have you seen sort of like output from them and found that useful, or is it just usually just a list of findings that don't really give you joy?
I mean, I can jump in but
sure.
I feel like I might be monopolizing this a little bit, so I'm anxious about that. Certainly feel free to interrupt me at any point.
Well, I mean, I'll just like Sam and well, you told us in chat, but Sam, just like tell us what you said about everything not in contracts?
I mean, I guess maybe I'm not connecting the dots here. In chat, I just said I'll pass on the question because when I'm reviewing code, I basically or a project, I basically ignore everything that's not in contracts. And I guess to even be more specific, I ignore everything uh, that's inside tests as well. Because I don't, unless the code is like so confusing as to I'm not sure what the correct behavior is. There's really no point in me checking the test. I think it's just a waste of time. But actually, on the topic of fuzzing, I once again will start at Georgios has been like one of the major drivers behind the DevTools shilling, I think, and now it's rubbed off onto me. So I would now shill DevTools again because you did this presentation internally at Paradigm where you showed off the fuzzing and property testing that you can do with Dap, and it's actually kind of like, you obviously you have like Echidna in Metacore, and I think MythX does fuzzing too, right? Am I misremembering? Yeah.
Yes.
And you can do fuzzing and property testing with them. If you want, you can go more advanced, I'm sure, but it's always felt sort of inaccessible, I feel like. It's always seemed like this hurdle to overcome to figure out how to like use these tools. And the interesting thing with DevTools is they've taken a very similar approach to how Go does it, which is you basically you just write a function in Solidity, like maybe right beside your actual code itself, and you just put in as parameters to the function the things you want the fuzzer to explore, and that's all you need to do, and the rest is just handled for you. Just run the command. So I think that's actually really awesome, and hopefully as more and more people find out about this through the nonstop shilling that happens everywhere, maybe we'll see more and more usage of fuzzing and property testing.
So to clarify, what I think I understand is like it looks a lot like a typical test suite, but instead of saying transfer one token to Sam, I'd say transfer X tokens to somebody, and that's all I do. I leave that open, and the fuzzer takes it from there.
Yeah, pretty much. You could have like, if you had a function that, did some complex math to figure out the returns for some exchange, right? You could treat it as a black box. It takes some uint256 as input and returns some uint256 as output, and you could just tell the fuzzer, I want you to just I just care about this uint256 input, and then assert on the next line like the output is same, right? And the fuzzer takes care of the rest. It's just that magical.
Yeah. So for anyone not really aware of what fuzz testing is, it's basically that it's instead of writing one test at a time, it's tools that generate ideally millions of test cases, and sometimes can be quite sophisticated about like speaking from diligence. What for some reason the fuzzer there is called Harvey, and like that's not really like a product name, it's just the internal name. But Harvey, it's quite it tracks where it's been in the bytecode, and when it like bounces off a require statement or an if branch multiple times, it does like solving to try and say, okay, like I almost got this if else branch to flip so that I could get into that, and it tries to figure out the math so that I actually can trigger that, which is not an easy problem. And I think that is, I actually was just looking, and it's about a month ago that I think they've really shifted the focus from MythX over to just like fuzzing and doing more fuzzing as a service. And there's also like, I'm really interested in what we were working on there, which is this tool called Scribble, which allows you to write basically NAT spec formatted comments, which will then you recompile the Solidity, and it adds all these assert statements that allow you to describe specifically the failure cases. It was still coming along as far as sort of like usability, but I think I'm due to check it out again. Go ahead, Rajeev.
Yeah, I think two critical points that were made, right? One of them is as maybe security researchers who are deeply into the space, we focus a lot on the effectiveness of tools, understandably so. How accurate it is, false positives, all that make a big difference. We also focus a lot on the efficiency of tools. And the second part actually leads to the usability aspect of the tool itself, that I believe oftentimes is not, because if you're deep in the weeds, then, if we are developing and if it's all open source, then we're using it. So we really don't appreciate how deep we are. And if that same tool is actually expected to be used by the developers of protocols, like you said, may have like a week or two to actually look at this tool, then that barrier, I think, becomes a huge deal, right? In terms of, let's take Slither, for example, right? Take it, install it, and you run it, and it should just work right out of the box, right? But for some of these other deeper tools, like you said, right, be it fuzzing, be it symbolic checkers, there's just so much heavy lifting that needs to be done, even before you can start using it, right? I mean, you need to understand how that tool works, the intricacies, the documentation of the tool itself, and then we need to write the rules, be it fuzzing or let's say property-based testing, right? So there's just so much work that is involved there, which I think, hopefully over time will get much simpler, so that the product or protocol teams themselves can actually start using these tools to a good extent. So I think is something that maybe as a community we don't pay enough attention to.
I agree. Nikesh.
No, I was going to say, so I haven't actually used fuzzing since I've joined this space, but like I used to do some fuzzing stuff back in like of VPN traffic, and you just throw it a bunch of packets and see what breaks. At least at the time, a lot of what we were looking for was crashes, basically looking for places where the whole thing crashes, and then seeing if you could instrument the system later and find where it broke. I was a little surprised to hear that logic applied to the smart contract space, just partly because you're not trying to like crash the EVM in any sense. You're really you're maybe it's closer to like SMT or like property based testing rather than what we'd call fuzzing. Maybe I'm misunderstanding the term, or I've got some bias that's forcing me to think in a particular way. Certainly, your idea at the end of like being able to have NAT spec a particular property. For instance, I've mentioned this example in the past. Sometimes I'm looking at code and then I know that this value is meant to be a percentage, so it has to be less than 1, for instance. But it's not immediately obvious just looking at the code that it always is. To the extent that it's possible to like NAT spec that and say this is supposed to be less than 1, please make sure that that's true throughout the whole code base. I think all that would be useful, but personally I haven't actually seen that happen. It sounds like you're telling me I just have to wait a couple of weeks and then maybe that'll be out.
Well, I mean, in fairness, I think that's how all of the fuzzing related tools that we've talked about work. Is you basically have to reason, like you got to know your system and you got to know what's wrong. And if something is a nonce that only goes up, then like the fuzzer can tell you if it goes down, but you have to write somewhere that it should only go up and it should never go down. So like there's various places you can write that. But yeah, it's not just like a general crash kind of situation. It's you have to be able to define your failure modes.
Can I just clarify, is it doing this probabilistically or is it actually exhaustively checking the possible inputs? I mean, obviously I think, exhaustively is a weird term when you're like enumerate through the whole space, but you could do it symbolically as well to check all
it's, I mean, like I know that like the MythX suite, they would measure like how much of the code they'd visited. It still doesn't mean like you could hit 100% of the code and not necessarily have all meet like all the edge cases or explore all the kind of like execution modes. But that is the objective, is to traverse the entire system.
I will mention that DevTools does do symbolic execution as well, but also it's a good point that right now like all these tools do require you to define it. Like the weak part about unit tests is that you can only unit test what you can think of, right? And so often, in hindsight, you'll look at something and go, damn, like that would have been a really nice unit test, but like the hard part wasn't writing the test; it was thinking of the test in the first place. And with, fuzzing and symbolic execution or property testing, it's, you've alleviated some of the challenges with like, maybe defining exactly how to test, but you still do have to think of the thing to test for. And in fact, that even, we can take that one level higher with formal verification. We see that as one example that comes to mind, the miso bug that I found the couple months ago. I don't know how time works anymore. That was formally verified. It was just that there was no case defined for both both buying into the auction and using the batch contract. And so once the team went and like added that case, the formal verifier was like, yeah, there's a bug here, but you got to think of that first. And so it might be interesting. I don't even know if this would be possible or not, but if there was some way to just like, similar to how traditional fuzzers just look for crashes, if there's a way to just look for ways to send ether out or ways to transfer tokens out, that might be way too computationally expensive. I'm not really sure. Maybe someone else here can comment on that.
No. Like, I think that's Slither does that, Rajeev. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, to a certain extent, right?
Yeah.
Whatever you can determine syntactically and semantically, like loved ether and so on. But yeah, please continue.
Okay, yeah. So I was gonna say, like, I'm pretty sure MythX does that. The thing is, if you care enough about the security of your contracts, like it's usually kind of, well, no, this is not true. Obviously, experience bears that out, but I think it's hard to detect the weird things. And I think that the messages that you end up showing are like, well, there's like a kind of like you call out here to unknown. We're not sure what you're going to do. But like fuzz testing. So as soon as you call out to an unknown contract, what are you going to do? Like generate all the possible contracts, or symbolic execution as well. Like that just doesn't really make any sense. But I was hoping, and so formal verification. I'm just like, overrated or underrated? Let's phrase it that way. We'll go around, and Rajeev, you got to go first because you sort of.
Absolutely. So yeah, I think like with many things in in the space and maybe in life, right? Formal verification is probably overrated in the near term in the space and probably underrated in the longer term. So there's just, I mean, I get the impression maybe it's sort of the meme of the season or whatever, right? But there's just like, hey, let's go do formal verification, right? I mean, I do believe that property-based testing such as Scribble or Certora's Prover or KVM or Verx from Chain Security, all these do have, will play a significant role. Maybe just where we are in the maturity cycle of the tools. I mean, there are so many things that are moving, right? Solidity is changing every month. Ethereum itself is changing, the protocols, everything. So in that scheme of things, I think just sort of moderating our expectations from these tools, especially formal verification, that it's not a magic wand. And like Sam said, well, great, we do use a formal verifier, but how do we know that the formal verification tool itself, I mean, somebody built it, how do we know that that doesn't have bugs? How do we know the properties that were written do not have omissions, right? So those things, and this sort of goes back, I mean, none of this actually is new in the Web3 space. If you look back all the way to who was it? Ken Thompson's Turing Award lecture on reflections on trusting trust, right? So he talked about, well, all these layers that we seem to rely upon as something very canonical, something perfect, but that's not the case, and that applies even to formal verification tools. So no wonder, right? I mean, if you have a checkbox saying, well, this protocol was formally verified, it's not a magic wand, but that is not a problem with the tool or the approach. It's just a problem with our mismatched expectations, if you will.
So what you're saying is you should write a GD spec?
We should write a what? Sorry,
A,
I missed
a
that.
spec,
I,
so
uh,
that you can
I
like identify those things, I guess.
Right. I mean, that would be, again, a mismatched expectation at this point. Having looked at several code bases, I would be happy, for a typical project for something more than one screen README file, right? Something, we can start with that. We can go to better documentation. I mean, if we have a list of all the contracts and the interactions, a spec would be fantastic. Absolutely.
Yeah, a spec is a powerful tool. English language, underrated. Nikesh, overrated or underrated formal verification?
I think it's probably useful, but as Rajiv's pointing out, there's probably a mismatch between what it can do and what people think it can do. Even the spec, I don't think helps as much as you might expect. At least my instinct from that is based on the fact that people have been talking about like formally verifying VPNs forever, and there is a spec. Like there's an RFC and it's existed for a long time, and it seems theoretically that you should be able to just implement that spec in a formal verification tool, and then. But still, OpenSSL has the market, and it's like spaghetti code completely. And partly that's just because they got there first, and also, like if you want to you want to add this new protocol, or you want to use Diffie-Hellman instead, or you do something slightly different, then that's like spins out a whole 6-month, 8-month project to specify that part of the test. I think particularly in the blockchain space, it's moving so quickly that by the time we have like a spec of ERC20, people are already doing flash loans and stuff. So then you'll lose the ability to at least keep up to date with what people are doing, I suppose. Like
Yeah.
I do think it probably would be useful to have formally verify some repeatable components. Like if you get, I might just throw OpenZeck component contracts in here. Like if you can formally verify something that's been used like in lots of different projects and is relatively well defined. I think that might be useful, but at the moment I think it's just going to be lagging behind for a long time. I don't know.
Yeah. So I think like Sam, anything to add? I think Rajiv's short-term, long-term answer is just so easy, like effortlessly wise that it's hard to add a whole lot. But
I mean, anecdotally, I will say that usually when I see that Satora has formally verified a repo, I'm like, okay, that's probably safe. Um, again, but I think that speaks of equal volumes to both the technique itself and also their team's ability to actually reason out what your code is supposed to do for you. Because that is what they do, is they sell you the service and they sell you the technology and then they sell you the service to use that technology. So
yeah, so one thing I think is interesting there is like one of my favorite auditing techniques was like making diagrams. And I think that's something like that's a form of spec. Like and so a lot of tools do this too. They in that they informal verification as well, like in that they force you to reason through they just put you through an exercise in which you sit down and you're like, what does it do? What does it actually do? And converting solidity to a picture or words, I think is an effective way of or properties, and maybe properties is a higher value output because you can reuse them. But I think for a lot of tools, that is my sense is that is a lot of the value, is that it forces you to interact with the system more deeply.
Yeah, I think I totally agree with that. And sorry, go ahead, Rajiv.
I was just going to do the same. Absolutely agree with with what was said. I think to sort of go back to one of the first questions that was posed, if there were two tools that I would love to see, right? Again, separating out the auditing from a developer perspective. From a development perspective, if there were two tools, I think those would be at two ends of the spectrum. One of them would be something like Slither, something that's very fast, static analysis, that catches all the code smells, that catches all the basic pitfalls, shows you what the best practices are. So that I think would give the best bang for the buck for the development team right away. And the other one would be the other extreme, which would be the property-based tests, because that would force the dev team to think about, well, one, do I have a spec, right? And we might call it spec, documentation, whatever, but it forces you to think of, well, what is the requirement, what is the expected behavior, right? And it makes you document that formally in the context of this tool, right? So those, I think, would be the two sort of top on my wish list.
So I have an instinct. It's not very well formalized, so I'm kind of shooting from the hip here. But I think Maurelian's point was excellent about the fact that it forces you through this process in itself is useful, even if the output of what the tool says might not be that readable. But I have a sense that we might be mixing layers, because at least in my experience, the real value of a lot of these things is being able to transfer the knowledge in the developer's head into someone else's head. So into an auditor, for instance, or just into another developer. So they have some threat model in mind, and they know that they wrote the code in this particular way because they're trying to avoid some particular style of attack. And then an auditor comes in and thinks, well, have you thought of this style of an attack? And maybe they have, maybe they haven't, but then there's a huge ramping up period, and then it's also quite unfortunate. You get to the end of an audit and now you're an expert in the system, and then that wanes until the next audit shows up. So like, I think there are a lot of processes that are potentially in place to maybe shorten that time period, so that we're not doing it in batches. So like, obviously it'll be useful to try and maintain more of a continuous sort of relationship that way. But I think we then make a mistake potentially when you then try and specify it in the code, because at the high level, I haven't said anything about this particular contracts or if statements or anything. I'm thinking really just about, have you thought about replay attacks? Have you thought about access control issues and that sort of thing? And I guess a lot of times your threat model goes out of date after a while. Like you wrote your code assuming some sort of threat model, and then it turns out the ecosystem changes. Flash loans become a thing, or for instance, now you can do reentrancy because the gas limit has changed, or something like that has gone wrong. And you don't go back and revisit the code because you thought the code was self-sufficient. Whereas what we really need is just a way to transfer knowledge. I think a lot of the value comes from just the existence of the security community that has seen all of these things before. You can go through previous audit reports and stuff. We have repositories of where these things exist. So like, you could say, I'm building a tool, like I'm building a voting tool. Let me look at all the places. These are the checks that I need to worry about. These are the things that are broken. I think a lot of that is useful well before you actually get to the code level. And to the extent that we can have tools that just like spread security knowledge around the space, I think that's going to be at least it seems like an underserved market. That's my own instinct. But it isn't particularly formalized yet. So we're kind of just shooting a little from the hip here.
Mm-hmm. Fair enough. I think like a good example of that, like the threat model changing, I think is maybe like developing a DEX. This will use a bunch of ERC20 tokens. And then somebody's like, oh, but I have a token that will do callbacks to whoever you want when you transfer it. And you just don't think about that, right? You're like, it's just an ERC20 token. It does nothing fancy. So maybe just to keep moving along, and I don't know, this is probably a little bit out of everybody's wheelhouse, but like, do you have thoughts about like what you should be doing when the code is running on chain? Like, it's out there. Is there a magical way to detect and prevent attacks in real time? And I think, Nikesh, this is like kind of softballing for you, so go ahead.
Yeah. I think this, I sort of have to mention at this point. So we suddenly open Zeppelin, we have this tool, Defender. It's got auto tasks. You can suddenly write up your security properties or things that you want to check. You can say like, if this balance changes or if some property holds on the blockchain, then please run this task, or at least give me an alert. We're also developing a new tool called Forta, which is like a Web3 native cybersecurity thing, which is it's basically like an alert monitoring system. There'll be details to come soon. But the important thing, the thing that's particularly interesting about this is it's Web3 native. So it's not like an external tool that you're running and then you try and pipe it into the blockchain. It's actually running directly on the chain, so you'll be able to hook it into all of your apps. It's like it's decentralized and directly integratable in the same way and composable in the same way the rest of the blockchain is. So that's my pitch.
But like, is it gonna save you, or is it just gonna make sure that you know right away that your system is totally owned?
True. That's a good point. So it is it's like agent detection. So it's detecting things that have changed. It's not necessarily preventing it, but suddenly we do have things like audit tasks that say, like, if this happens, then run this command. So you could like pause a contract at the moment that something changes. So you can take sort of automated actions that way.
If you get like, I mean, if the attacker doesn't bother to use flashbots, I guess, right? Like, and
right, yeah. So of course, yeah, it'll shorten the time period it takes to react. Maybe that's a good way of saying that. But
yeah. Are there other things out there, or Sam or Rajeev, do you have a thought about not even tooling, but just like running these systems safely? No is an okay answer too.
Just okay. No. I mean, I've seen quite a few attempts at building these sort of things now where, you try to alert on transactions in the mempool. Of course, as Nikesh said, now that Flashbots is more and more a thing, that becomes kind of hard. The only time I've really seen, you know what, I don't really know where I was going with this. The point I was trying to get to is like I tried building one of these at one point, and it was meant to like alert on past transactions, so like things that were already mined, and just to see like if anything interesting was going on, try to like automatically detect if a transaction was like anomalous. It was like somewhat okay. It was very noisy though, so I sort of just gave up on it. But that would be, I don't know if anyone's built that or made a public version of that, but that would be cool to see, just like a live automated threat intel feed almost.
Yeah. I don't have much to add in this space, but maybe I have more questions in this space, right? So if you, and I've discussed this with some of you in the past, is if you look at the Web 2 world, right, you have a long list of security products in the last 30, 40 years, so all the way from AVs, firewalls, intrusion detection systems, and all the different names of that, intrusion prevention systems, all these things, right? So there's no reason, except taking into account some of the big changes in the Web3 space, maybe culturally as well as technologically, that these systems could not theoretically be implementable in the Web3 space, right? So if you're able to see a transaction in space, as it is flowing through the mempools or whatever layers you're in, theoretically, one should be able to simulate that, for your mainnet with whatever tooling, be able to simulate this transaction and be able. Well, you obviously need better and faster resources than the attackers themselves, but you should be able to do that and then, put in a transaction that actually takes over or goes ahead of the attacker's transaction and somehow fixes the code or makes the attacker's transaction invalid, right? So theoretically, I think it should be possible. I don't know. I mean, maybe Nikesh and others have more practical experience in the space with Defender and other tools. But that was just a thought, and I hopefully will see some research or maybe even products or techniques in the space.
To just make sure I understand that claim. So the idea is you see something in the mempool and then you're essentially trying to replace that transaction. So obviously front running as a concept is existing and people are doing it for like non-security related reasons, like just for arbitrage generally. And that's been developed quite extensively to the point where people are like running gas suctions and things whenever something new happens. And of course, Flashbots now is alleviating some of that. I understand you're perhaps approaching it from the security angle, but maybe I haven't seen why it's a different concept. It still seems similar to seeing something that you don't want to happen or something that you want to prevent first and then getting your transaction first. Unless the contract itself is designed in such a way that it has a delay. Sorry, I'm thinking out loud at this point and I might be misleading here.
No, yeah.
Sam, why don't you jump in here? I think you've been quiet for a little bit. So.
I mean, put me on the spot, I guess. I don't know. I've been quiet because I didn't really have much to add. Hmm.
You were unmuted. I took that as a signal. Maybe.
Oh, sorry. Yeah,
maybe I read too much.
that's my bad.
Okay. I mean, I kind of think you're right, Nikesh. Like in the, you know, if you can, well, basically, I guess you're gonna get into, this is like outside our wheelhouse, but like you're gonna get into reorgs, right? Like, because you got Flashbots, you got private transactions. I'm a brilliant black hat hacker. I know how to, you know, I found an exploit. I submit it through Flashbots. Nobody can see that, and it's going to execute. I'm going to own your contract. The only way to get back to like to restore that is to reorg the chain and like outbid. And I kind of lost track of that conversation that was happening over the summer, but that's where that goes to me as far as I can tell.
It still sounds like it might be in the same bucket, in the sense that and now I'm definitely speaking outside. I don't know anything about how useful it is to reorg or how plausible it is to do that. Hopefully, people are thinking about that to make that difficult. But I would still guess that if that tool is available, if that technique is available, it'll be used first to win like trades, Uniswap trades or something, to arbitrage some. As long as there's like direct money on the line, that'll be the use case originally, and people will be doing arbitrage with that tool before like the security level catches up. That's my instinct. So
okay, I guess we got like a minute and a half left.
Oh,
so
sorry.
Well, a question I kind of like I just remembered I really wanted to ask is like, what tool needs to exist or like be way better than it currently is that you would like to see in your life? So let's like 15 seconds. What does it do? Nikesh, you're already unmuted. Go ahead.
Fair enough. I have this grand plan of like making a threat modeling tool that I think that works. It's same concept I was saying, working at the high level of understanding threats rather than understanding code. That's my 15-second pitch.
Cool. Rajeev?
So I have a slightly different wish, right? I think all tools have their place, but my wish is they get used sooner than waiting for the auditors to run them. So I'm thinking, and I'm getting really big on the shift left that has been such a big thing in the Web2 space. I think Web3 space needs a lot of that.
I have like a really big, insane idea and like a smaller doable idea. The big one is like, I want like this integrated all-in-one platform where I can like view contracts, decompile them, analyze transactions, inspect storage slots, look up 4-byte hashes, like the works, right? Like everything I need to do ever is like a tab away, like convert from hex to ASCII or whatever, right? All that stuff. That is like a lot of work. Oh, so I suck at UI design, so I'm not doing it myself. The more doable one is like some tool in my IDE that lets me annotate specific variables or blocks or whatever with things that I don't have to remember. Like this variable is always going to be even, or this variable is always going to be less than 100 or something like that. And then that way, when I click through 3 functions and I look at the variable again, you know, I don't have to remember that. I can just hover over it and it's like, oh, hey, by the way, you said this is going to be less than 100. So, you know, just for reference.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. I think we're at time.
Yeah, that was an awesome discussion. We'll do 2 quick things, and anybody can pick. We don't have to do everybody. But the first kind of question is, for people who are trying to enter the space as auditors, do you have any tips or advice for them? And what do you kind of recommend they do if they want to be on the auditing side?
Join the Securium Bootcamp. Sorry.
No, that's you should shill first. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe just to give more context to people, what is the bootcamp and how can they find out more?
Yeah, I mentioned this in the beginning, but Securium Bootcamp is a 3-month bootcamp that has just started in October. It's funded by an EF grant, and the sponsor partners are some of the top auditing firms in this space. The idea is to be extremely open to people from different contexts. So there is a 2-month learn phase where people are going to learn about Ethereum 101, Solidity 101, 201, audit techniques, audit findings, all the rich content that we already have curated in this space. And the final month is going to be where the rubber really hits the road. They're going to be taking a look at some real world projects where they actually evaluate them for audit readiness and hopefully, have a good chance at becoming auditors.
Awesome. And I'll kind of blend this on the other side of that.
Sorry, I feel like I might want to answer that question just because, first of all, I certainly agree with Rajeev that the securing bootcamp seems excellent, but of course, I feel like I have to point out, if you're going to ask me the question, Open Zeppelin has a bunch of videos that we put out, like Tincho, one of our security researchers, puts these things out. We have like the ETHOnaut, and all sorts of these sorts of techniques are useful, and we're always hiring. So if you actually resonate with that question, then come hit us up.
All right, one quick one, and others can kind of mix and match the last one too. Just for people who are trying to now deploy apps to production or contracts to production, or explain that. Any tips for how should they think about auditing or insurance or anything else around that, and what are some things to keep in mind for newcomers? Very open-ended, anything qualifies.
I think I have maybe the same instinct, like try and get plugged into the security ecosystem. There's lots of people who will guide you through the process, but it's hard to answer that in 1 second, but try and get plugged into the ecosystem is my main suggestion.
Book your audits early, the lead times are long.
Perfect. Well, we'll end that there. Thank you so much, Sam, Rajeev, Nikesh, and Maurelian. This was an awesome discussion. And for any other questions, we'll relay them to you over email. So with that, we are ready for our next talk. So